Tony Roberts.
Eric Riddle.
Good to be with you here this morning. We actually reside about, 5 blocks from each other. So
Yep, 5 at most.
We could easily walk to each other's houses, but we're being safe. There's a pandemic happening, so we decided to do it this way. We're glad to have all of you here with us this morning and this evening for those who are tuning in from Africa. I'm actually here in what we call Studio E. What we got back here, we are podcasters. So Tony and I actually had a dialogue for our podcast that we recorded last week. That'll be released probably in a couple weeks. So there may be some stuff on that release that we won't be able to cover within this time. So anyway, that's called Revealing Voices. You can listen to that on your PC at revealingvoices.com or on our podcast feed. You can get on most Apple apps and others. So just wanted to put that out there. You can hear Tony's voice for hours of what he's already recorded over the last 2.5 years.
And Eric's voice.
Yeah. Right. So Tony's got a new book out. To have further proof, look at that.
I'm legit.
That is the front page of today's newspaper. So pretty awesome. The book. Tony, tell us the title of your book.
It is When Despair Meets Delight, Stories to Cultivate Hope for those with battling mental illness. And it is, as I say, it's a memoir of a minister with mental illness and a model for mental health ministry.
And if you would, there was actually a little bit of back and forth with how you wanted to title the book. I think there might be some insight just in talking through how you arrived at that title, because you changed it from an original working title.
Yeah, there's a category, and it's language that's still evolving to try to distinguish between mental health issues like depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive, that as many as 25% of people in the world struggle with. Try to distinguish between that and brain illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression. And in an effort to distinguish these, some people have used the terms serious mental illness and generalized mental illness, I think it is. The problem with that is that sometimes mental health conditions are quite serious and can lead to such terrible things as suicide. So we are still in the process of finding the language. My first title used the phrase serious mental illness, and I quickly, in talking with others, decided to take that out. My next book, however, the language is still evolving, and we are probably going to shift from that to brain disorders or brain illnesses to distinguish between the mental health conditions many people have to the actual brain disorders that can be detected by a scan. No different than someone with dementia, Alzheimer's, and that will be more focused on that. But this book really reaches out to everyone who has a mental health condition.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tony and I met actually right after a similar article appeared in our paper. That was about 6 years ago, Tony?
Yeah, 2014.
Yeah, 2014. That was your first book. I read that, loved it. That was more vignettes, 2 to 3 page stories or kind of glimpses of different periods of your life that you'd organized in a different way, more as a devotional with a lot of connection to the Psalms and how the Psalms connected with your life. This book is different. You've gone in a more chronological process with your life and how mental health and ministry have been woven in through your life experience. And for those of you who don't know, Tony was a Presbyterian pastor for 20 years?
18 and a half in terms
18.
of being in the pastorate.
Yeah, 18 and a half years. So you talk a lot about that in the book. I think people's ministry evolves throughout their life. So I guess my first question would be, when did you see your ministry start to move towards a mental health ministry?
Well, very early. I started in ministry in 1990, and was having mental illness symptoms from extreme depression to, all-night mania. And fortunately, I had learned early on and in college to kind of optimize that and get ahead. I would get ahead as far as like 6 sermons, and then I would fall back and not be able to get out of bed except to deliver the sermons. It came to a head in 1995 when I was 30 years old, and I had gone on to a medication for depression, and with my diagnosis, it didn't temper the mania. So I was sent into a manic psychosis. And from that, I spent time in the hospital. And really, I think through the leading of the Holy Spirit and the guidance of a lot of people, I chose to be transparent and tell people, even though I was still a minister, a full-time minister, I told people about my mental illness. And from the hospital, we orchestrated a way to get word out. And have a tremendous show of support. I know it's rare and really a divine miracle that happened. But at that point on, and really since that time, every day of my life, I think about what it means to be a minister with mental illness. I lasted in my pastoral work, went from that point forward all the way up until 2008. And then due to complications related to my illness and other factors, I retired early.
Thank you, Tony. I think your ministry is a little unique in that social acceptance of mental health has been evolving a lot, right? I think we all know how much I think stigma plays a role. And for you to be able to step out in 1995 at that period of time and really feel that level of acceptance and encouragement from your congregation is really unique. And reading some people's responses, they talked about you being a trailblazer. I've got to say that the church's ability to embrace you and allow you to take on that ministry has been a really empowering thing for you. But disclosure is not easy. So I think it would be good for our audience to maybe talk just a little bit about how to be discerning and how to share a diagnosis with loved ones, with friends, or even more publicly, right? Because it's something with anyone with the mental health diagnosis, it's a decision, right? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Eric, you and I both know, leading a supportive, Faithful Friends, our mental health support group, that there are young people who we would never advise to go public with their mental illness, because the likelihood of them experiencing discrimination, losing their job, losing their livelihoods is high, I would never advise anyone. In fact, even in my case, after I received that warm welcome from that church, I moved to another call at another church, and I met with the ministry supervisor, what they call Presbytery executive, but he's the person overseeing, like a bishop. And I asked him, when and how and how do I disclose this? And he had the best recommendation I've ever received, and that is, you look for two key leaders who will understand you and keep you accountable. And at this church in particular, there were two psych nurses who were leaders, and they could understand both the limitations and the possibilities. And I confided in them. And then he said, don't feel like you have to keep a secret, because if you feel like you have to keep a secret, then it's going to work against you. Like any other secrets that we keep, the pressure to hold on to something and not let go creates an unendurable burden. But he then said something that I think was very wise, and he said, use it when your ministry calls for it. And shortly after I interviewed there, even before I was accepted, a young woman from the church attempted suicide and was in the psych unit. And I talked with her parents and said, look, if it's acceptable with you, if it's acceptable with her, I'd like to visit her. And so I had the opportunity to visit her, and I could say, I didn't go into specifics of my condition, but I could say, I've been in a place like this. And, then my authority as a minister and as a fellow believer became more relevant.
That's good. I think it's important for the listeners, your audience, to know that I think in your book and your ministry, it's not been you saying, I'm a trailblazer, I did this, you can too. It's not where you come from. And I think it's important to really underline that.
This book in particular.
You're a wise man offering wise counsel to be discerning, Tony.
Thank you, Eric. I don't feel wise sometimes. I still make major mistakes, but I do say that this book in particular is really not an advice book for those of us who have mental illness, but it does point in the direction of, if you're a pastor, if you're a faith leader, and you want to be more compassionate and cultivate hope for those, open the doors for those with mental illness or loved ones, those impacted. Here's what's happened in my life, and here's what you can do.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to being an author, I mean, you're a very active person. I mean, your pastoring has been maintained, even though it's not within a official church leadership position. So you and I have done some work together. Maybe just a little background when you're not writing, which we know is a huge passion of yours and a great spiritual gift you share with the world. What are some other ways that your ministry has been expressed?
Well, they all begin with writing. I first I should start with my limitations. I do not have the capacity to be reliably public, so it's impossible for me to function in pastoral ministry because I just never know what the day holds. I'm a rapid cycling bipolar disorder, and it's literally times that I can't get out of bed, and on the other extreme there are times that I can't sleep and I'm not safe, to the extent that I can't drive, I can't it would just not be wise. So, however, what I can do, and what those of you who live in different time zones have seen, is that I can stay up all night and write to people and respond to people. And during those times when I'm able to channel my mania into writing ministry through the magic of technology, that in that way I can continue to be something like a pastor. I do that, and I have that opportunity through people I've come to know through Facebook and Messenger, and I have a Facebook group called Hope for Troubled Minds. And then Eric, you and I have locally a mental health support group called Faithful Friends, and I can check in on people through texts and so forth. And then recently I have become affiliated with a local church, St. Peter's Lutheran, and they have contracted with me on a volunteer basis to provide staff with the tools to respond better to people with mental illness and those impacted, as well as be a friend to those with mental illness. And so, unfortunately, with the pandemic, I don't do a lot of that in person. I did beforehand, but I still follow up with people. And now it's getting a little looser in Indiana, so I go for walks with people.
Right. So we're talking about St. Peter's Lutheran Church. They have a robust counseling ministry that they've had for years, and they brought you on board as a peer recovery specialist type role, right? I mean, that's fair to say that's kind of the model in which you're a part of that ministry there. And the way this relates back to your book is you really highlight the different people's support for you and other people in a way, their own ministry supporting mental health, yours or others, right? With St. Peter's kind of being an example. Are there other kind of signposts along the way of people that helped you that you could share that you did highlight in your book?
Absolutely. Well, I see some faces here that have been pivotal in my own journey through this process. Grace Church in Rochester has played a role. After I separated and divorced from my first wife, I was living alone in Rochester without really a whole lot of support to keep my mental health balance. And the one place I could rely on is people from Grace Church. And whether it be Kurt here with us or Carl or Mark, the pastor, and they really did their best to look after me. My family, Dan or April, whoever that is, I just see a name, April is a psych nurse, and Dan has worked extensively with people who have mental health challenges. And so my family's provided a safety net for me. It seems God has provided each step of the way someone or more than one who can create this safety net for me to keep moving forward. I mean, I'm so grateful because and I talk with my therapist and psychiatrist about this all the time. The gravity of my diagnosis is such that many, if not most people, would wind up homeless or in prison. And I've been close to homeless once, but because of the support network I have, I've been blessed. And now with my wife, it's even better.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about mental health ministry, it's just really important to remember that, from Tony's angle, he is a man that has a mental health diagnosis, and he has a ministry, but also, as he's saying, there are people along the way who do not have a diagnosis who have supported him, and that in its own right is also a form of mental health ministry. So I think a big point here is that the ministry of those without the diagnosis, supporting and lifting up the voices of people like Tony, are every bit as important in really helping ministry along the lines of mental health support grow, right? Tony, transitioning a little bit on your book, I read it back in December. The world was a little bit different then, as we know, and you actually did a bit of a rewrite after the pandemic started, because you wanted to make this as timely as possible, which I think was a brilliant move to be able to share that, because this is something, the pandemic, that's going to have impacts on people's mental health for a long time, right? So could you share a little bit more about the rewrite there? And, I think we know why you decided to include that, but what that's meant to you, and how we can better support each other amidst this tough time globally.
Well, in the pandemic, I think everyone went through a measure of, mental health challenge, some extremely so. Those of us with mental illness, in some way, it's interesting because some of my friends with mental illness were saying, I don't feel as bad because the whole world has caught up with me. And there's a sense in which that was true, but there was still this challenge that we all faced, and we were in this together. My own ministry took a different form because obviously I wasn't out meeting with people, going to the church and having interaction with the staff. I was pretty well quarantined here. But I decided to start this Facebook group called Hope for Troubled Minds, which initially reached out to people who were loved ones of those with mental illness. We've expanded since then, but it was a way for me to hear many of the challenges people face, raise questions about issues of faith and mental illness, hear stories that were inspirational or extremely heartbreaking. And all of these could be included in my book. Also, personally, my father was in a health crisis, which impacted me greatly. In March, around the time the pandemic struck, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so I had to go through the process of, grieving, and in many ways, it was a blessing because he was 80 years old, quite ready. And we were able to enjoy those last days together. He was always asking me about the book. And before he died, we had a chance to hear an audio version I created. The day that he died, I submitted it to the printer. So it didn't quite get to his hands, but he had heard it all. So.
And the book is dedicated to your father.
Yes, it's dedicated to Veston E. Roberts, the best dad ever. Because with Dad, he's everything was the best. If he was having pie, what was his favorite pie? It was always the one he was eating. So with Dad, everything was the best.
It's a great spirit of joy Veston had. So with your book in the big picture, what are some of the things you really hope that the book accomplishes among its readers?
Well, I'm hoping a number of things. The first of all is that it would give churches and pastors and faith leaders inspiration and desire to personally address the needs of those impacted by mental illness. And when I say impacted, I mean both those diagnosed and those with loved ones. I call it, there's a dangerous divide between those impacted by mental illness and the faith community. They don't know quite what to do with each other. There's a lot of distrust, some of it on the psychiatric side based on Freud's anti-religion. On the church side, it may stem back all the way from, interpretations of the Bible that, demon possession has no place in the community of faith. So there needs to be a coming together for the sake of everyone. I mean, these are people who are often considered the least of these. And our Christian calling is to be like Jesus and reach out. When you see stories, even if you accept that there is a spiritual component, spiritual evil wickedness involved in a condition of mental illness. And I want to stress that it's not the result of a commission of sin, but it does reveal that we have a flawed nature. We are broken in our spirit. But even if you do accept that there is demonic activity, what did Jesus do? He would go to these folks, and he went out of his way to go to Legion and release him from this bondage. So that's my primary goal, and I see it both in our country and around the world, in Africa and other ways. I don't know what my part will be, but hopefully it will stimulate others.
Yeah. So Tony, I think part of that is healing, right? For the individual, the family, for communities. We all struggle with mental health, regardless if it's us personally or someone in our family. And we mentioned here at the beginning of the interview that we do have a podcast called Revealing Voices, and the foundational question that we ask all those that we interview is, what does healing mean to you? I would like to take a moment, for you to be able to share, your response to that question, because, part of that is a thread throughout your book. So Tony, what does healing mean to you?
I think I need to start with what it doesn't mean, and that is that healing does not mean a cure. Only God knows the timing for when, if, and how a cure for mental illness and all its forms will come. Now, God has that capability. Don't get me wrong. A person like myself, or a person watching here, or people we meet, could be instantaneously cured if that's part of the will of God. If it doesn't happen, that doesn't mean it's a lack of faith. It doesn't mean that it's a lack of prayer on the part of the people working with them. So that's what it doesn't mean. Healing, what it does mean is, I know, Eric, you and I get a response often on our show in terms of restoration. Healing is being restored in our body, our minds, our spirits, and our relationships. And I think that's one aspect of healing in the stories of Christ that is overlooked, because we only see the physical side. But often you'll see that the restoration that occurs is communal. Jesus sends people back into the community to function as members of the faith community, as members of society. So one healing that I've experienced and that I pray others will as well is out of isolation into a supportive community.
Tony, thank you for sharing that. It is 10:46. Do want to transition to our audience here. We did have some write-ins, so I'm going to get into these first. And for those of you who are on the call, feel free to write questions into the chat as well. We'll get to as many as we can here in our remaining 15 minutes or so. The first one is from Sherry Thomas. It says, what is a good way to start a group, along the lines of mental health ministry, and to get to a point where you're able to share it with a pastor?
I think one comment I would make is that, don't wait around for the leadership to take initiative. I know one of our viewers here, Bob Mills, has really set an example of this at his church. And, it really takes people with the experience, whether it be people living with mental illness or loved ones, to step up and say, okay, not only do I think you should do this, but I'm going to work with you to do this. Pastors have so much on their plates. And if it's a pastor who doesn't have personal experience with mental illness, they're not going to know what to do. So, I would say take initiative would be the first step.
Right, and the model of our ministry is peer recovery, right? And so we intentionally don't have a clergy member that like supervises the work being done in the group, right? So I think it's important to know that whatever model it takes, it does not require clergy from the church to be sitting in the room, right? It takes, of course, trusted partners, and a peer recovery model can certainly be a foundational part of any group that you have. The next question here, it says, what is one thing you hear from Christians when they are first diagnosed?
I think the question many Christians I know raise is, it comes in many forms, but it's a question of, is this a lack of faith? Is this God's judgment? Is there a flaw in me? Something to do with questioning our standing before God. And it's hard to come, even in this day and age that we've come to see it as biological. This is not a character flaw. It's a condition of our brains. There's still this lingering idea that somehow it's a reflection of who we are and something to be ashamed of. So I know when I was diagnosed, I felt a good bit of this. It was, actually, one of the first things I felt was anger at God. And I think a lot of Christians might feel that. And you have to get through that to come back to faith and be able to accept. But there is a grieving process when you find out this, because you hope about what your life is going to be dies, and you need to go through the process that would include anger and all the way up to acceptance.
Thanks, Tony. Next, this is from Cindy Pfeiffer. The previous one was also from Cindy. In your experience, what are some of the most common myths about mental illness within the Christian faith?
Well, sad to say, there is still the sense that within the church and the American church. I don't know, I'd be interested in knowing from the perspective of other cultures, other lands. But there's still is a lingering sense that we can pray it away alone. Prayer is pivotal in all forms of healing. I mean, if you have cancer, if you have, whatever it is, prayer should be the foundation. But praying something away instead of getting medical treatment is dangerous and against the will of God. So I think, and I've had this personally. I've had elders at churches, not Grace, but at other places, say to me, you really don't think you need to take medicine, do you? These were leaders in the church, and there was a study that showed that even as many as half of people in the American church believe that medicine for mental illness is not necessary.
I have a question from Rosette. It says, how do you differentiate between mental disorders caused by evil powers and those caused by other circumstances like extreme poverty? Rosette is from Uganda.
Yes, I'm so glad someone raised this, and especially someone from another country, because we, in our enlightenment in our country, we tend to think it's all biological. Science and medicine are going to take care of it, but the reality is that it is much more complex, and there are powers and principalities. We know this from our faith, from Scripture, that impact our mental well-being and all of our well-being. And the challenge becomes, how do we address the spiritual side, as well as, one facet of the question was, financial burden when you have extreme poverty or burdens by societal burdens. All these things can contribute to mental unrest and mental disorders, mental illness. I think distinguishing, just very quickly, I'll run through a pattern that Pastor Mark Tyke, who works at my church, says that when he gets called in to do, and he still gets called in to do demon exorcism, and he goes through a process. First, he sees if they have addressed it psychiatrically. Have you started on medication and tried to do that? Then, are you taking that medication regularly? Basically, it's like a screening process medically. You rule out the basic things, and then are you taking it regularly? Are you taking it without mixing it with other medication or self-medicating with drugs and alcohol? Do you have the social support that you need to encourage you? That's where poverty would come in. Do you have help to address those issues? Do you have the support of your faith community with prayer and so forth? There may well be times when there is a spiritual component that makes it impossible to address some of those underlying issues. And I'm not aware enough of how to address that, but there are people who are and need to do a form of spiritual intervention.
Thanks, Tony. Next question. This is from Isaac. He expresses his appreciation for you, Tony, and your mental health ministry. He says that mental health ministry is not common, especially here in Africa. What are you doing, Tony, to make your ministry spread all over the world, particularly here in Africa, where we have so much of mental illness because of so many things?
Well, I'm just beginning, Isaac, and I'm grateful for those of you who have come on board, because I'm hoping certainly that's a limit I have, to be quite honest. I can't travel. I mean, I'm lucky to go to New York and back. Because of my illness, I would be set off my mania and depression. But again, through the magic of technology, I can consult with people who are there and offer some resources, whether it be my book, or someone mentioned, I think it was Sherry, about putting together some handouts or having meetings like this and brainstorming. There can be ways where where we learn together how to move forward. And I have a lot to learn. I mean, there's someone that mentioned, they have street ministry and go to homes, and there are times when they go to the door and the parents have locked the person away for the past dozen years, and literally locked them away and they are refusing to let them come in. And in a sense, that is so foreign to my context. Then again, I got to thinking about that. It's not a whole lot different than people locked away in prison and COVID preventing them from getting in. And we have an extraordinary amount of people in prison who have mental illness in our country. So, we may like to think we're enlightened, but not the case sometimes.
Okay, it's 10:57. Do we have any remaining questions from our audience this morning? Okay. Well, Tony, I'll just say, for me, the ministry of Christ ultimately is unconditional love, and to express that unconditional love means that you do want to restore people into relationship with Christ and with the community, right? And so the ministries of humanity, I think, all are derived from that bedrock of unconditional love. So the work you're doing is showing love to those who may struggle to love themselves or may not receive a lot of love from others. So thank you for what you do, for the boldness that you share in your ministry. It's an honor to be your friend and to be able to help you in your work. So
thank you, Eric.
I'll leave it there. Tony, last words.
I would last words say there was a question Sherry brought up, and that is, how can we extend this meeting to benefit those that weren't here and further benefit those who are here? If you are interested in doing another meeting like this, we certainly can do that. If you want to invite other people, you all know how to reach me. I've sent personal messages to you through email, and if you have ideas or questions or topics, let me know.
Yeah, and Tony, you're a blogger. That blog is at delightindisorder.org.
Yes, and that's delightindisorder.org. Yeah.
Right. The website for our podcast is revealingvoices.com. Website for your new book is whendespairmeetsdelight.com. As you mentioned, you do have Hope for Troubled Minds, the Facebook group where you do a lot of work.
And then you can always bring over a sandwich at my house.
All right. This has been great. Tony, thanks for giving me the opportunity to interview you today. And thank you for all of our
Eric.
guests.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for participating. And we'll hope to do it again.
Yep. Cheers. Bye.